In this video we're gonna have a look at creating obstacles and how to make things happen when two objects collide. Also, before we jump into the tutorial, I have a quick update for you guys. I'm really glad the feedback on this series has been so positive so far. I'm having a blast making it. If you don't follow me on social media, when you're watching this video, I'm actually on my first vacation for a very long time. Because of that, the recent videos and the next ones are all scheduled. I really tried to fit in all of the blanks while I was gone, but unfortunately I had to skip a video. That means that this Wednesday there will be no new video. However, there will of course be another how to make a video game this Sunday. Alright, enough rambling, let's get started. So if we select our player, we can see that we currently have a player movement script. And we could definitely go ahead and add our collision code to this script as well. But to make things easier to understand, let's go ahead and create a separate script. Let's hit add component, and let's call it something like player collision. Hit new script, select C# and hit create and add. Let's double click the script to open it up in Visual Studio. Let's delete the two using tags up here and both the start and the update method. So adding code to colliding objects in Unity is actually really easy to do. Just like start and update, Unity has created a function with a specific name that is called whenever two objects collide. Let's write void just as we would do with start and update, and then write on collision enter. Make sure to use capital letters the same way that I do, and that you spell this in the right way. If you do this wrong, Unity is not going to throw an error, it's not going to complain in any way, but it's just not going to be working. We can then open and close some parentheses and some curly brackets. This now means that whatever code we place within these two curly brackets will be called whenever this object collides with something. So if we save this and go back into Unity, we can add our player collision script to whatever object we want. As long as the object has a rigid body and a collider, we can be sure that this code will be called. So to test this, let's just go ahead and throw a debug.log statement that says we hit something. Let's save this, go into Unity and hit play, and you can see now that right off the gate, a message displays in our console saying that we hit something. And you might think that's a bit weird because we don't currently have any obstacles in our scene, but Unity detects collision between all objects. So what we actually hit here is the ground. So when we hit play and our player falls down, this message is displayed. So let's try and add an obstacle to our scene. We can go over here in the hierarchy, right click, go 3D object and then cube. We can then reset the transform of this object. Let's move it forward a bit. Let's put it at 1 on the y-axis. Hit F to focus on it and we can see that it's standing on our ground. It's currently totally white, so let's go into our project panel, right click, go create, material, and this one is going to be our obstacle mat. We can make this a bit darker and we can drag it onto our obstacle. We can also consider turning down the smoothness. You will notice the preview down here changing. The higher the smoothness, the more light will bounce off the surface. Let's just leave that at 0. We can now take this cube, move it forward a bit more, and give it a scale on the x-axis of about 2. We can rename it to something like obstacle, and you will notice this right away has a box collider. So all we need to do is add a rigid body as well. We can go ahead and increase the mass a tiny bit. This is a bit bigger than the cube, so let's set it to something like 2. And that should be all the settings we need to configure. Now if we go to our console, clear all the stuff we have in it, and hit play, we should see that we both collide with the ground and the obstacle object. However, we need a way of keeping track of what we hit, because we don't want this to trigger whenever we hit the ground. To do that, we go into our script and we tell Unity we want some information about what object we hit. We can do that by inserting a bit of code within these two parentheses. Let's write collision. This lets Unity know that we want to gather some information about the collision, and then we need to give that information a name. Again, we can choose any name we want here. I'm just going to type collision info. Then down here, instead of simply writing we hit something, let's display what we hit. To do that, we can replace our text with collision info. We then use the dot to access different parts of this information. You can see that we can get information about the contact points between the colliders, stuff like the impact force sum, and other handy parameters. The most important one for us is that we can get info about the collider we hit. So let's write dot collider, and again we can type dot and we'll get all of the information about that collider. Here we can access the rigid body of our collider, the material of our collider, or just display its name. So by accessing the collider within collision info and the name within the collider, we should now display the name of whatever we hit. Let's see if this works in Unity. So let's hit play, and we should see that it first shows ground and then obstacle. This makes it really easy for us to have different stuff happen depending on what we hit. We could write if collisioninfo.collider.name is equal to obstacle, and remember to put this within quotation marks. Let's then open and close the curly brackets, and now everything we write within these two curly brackets will only happen if the name of the collider that we hit is obstacle. Let's see if that works. Let's write a debug.log statement here saying we hit an obstacle. Again, let's save this, head back into Unity and hit play, and you can see nothing happens when we hit the ground, but as soon as we collide with the obstacle, it displays a message. In our case, it actually displayed 2. That's because we had 2 quick collisions with the obstacle. It was hard to see with the naked eye, but Unity actually detected it. However, most of the times we'll only see 1. One thing that we should correct about this piece of code is that checking for an obstacle's name is not the best way to go about things. If you create a larger game, you can quickly have hundreds, if not thousands of objects in your scene, and searching through all of them can be really taxing on the computer. It also means that if we were to go ahead and rename the object, our code would no longer work. A much better way to go about things is using tags. Tags can be used to group objects together. So in our case, we could mark all of our different obstacles with an obstacle tag. To do that, we go up here where it says tag, we click untagged, and you can see the different tags created by Unity automatically. We need to go ahead and add a new one, hit the plus sign to create a new entry, and let's call this one obstacle. We can then select our obstacle object and change the tag to obstacle. Then in our code, instead of checking for the name, we'll check for tag. This is much better because it allows us to create a bunch of different objects, and as long as they share the same tag, we can configure them in any way we want. So let's just make sure that this is working by hitting play, and indeed it is. Of course, displaying a message in the console isn't very exciting. What you should probably do is add some kind of end screen, or maybe just restart the level. Those are great things to add, but it's enough for a separate video. Instead, let's make sure to disable our player's movement, because right now when we hit the object, we actually just keep flying. Instead, we can simply go in through script and turn off our player movement script. To do that, we need to have a reference to our player movement script. Let's go into Visual Studio. And before our function, let's add a variable. Let's type public, then the name of our script, which is player movement, and then we need to give the variable a name. In our case, let's call it just movement. When we now save this and go into Unity, we can see that there's now an empty slot here. So by simply dragging our player movement script into that slot, we've now created a reference from the player collision script to the player movement script, and we've called this movement. Now in our code, we can replace our debug.log statement with movement.enabled, and we can set this to false. Again, let's save, hit play, and hit an obstacle. We can now see that our player movement script turns off. So that was pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome people who donated in January, and a special thanks to Derek Heemskirk, Faisal Marify, James Calhoun, Robert Bonham, Peter Locke, and Jason Tito. If you want to become a patron yourself, you can do so at patreon.com/Brackeys. Thanks a lot, guys.